All right, so we've got short reviews from April 2nd, 2024, and it's just another group of early April releases. We've got one from March here, and not too much to say about this week. There's a lot of great releases coming out at the end of this week, but there's a lot more coming out in about the third week of April that will be most impressive. Uh, One thing that I'd overlooked in March because it was announced and released the same day, was Black Metal Cult: The Return of Mutilation. This is a southern France-based black metal project, mostly from Mainock, who is the sort of voice and the mind behind their music. And they return. I think their last record was 2007 that they released. I've never been the most adamant Legion Noir fan, uh, but I appreciated a lot of the early work from this band, especially Hail Satanas, We Are the Black Legions. I think that's the only really essential release from Mutilation early on. I do like their debut full length, but I think that the EP is better. It's more direct. It's more in a classic style, and I'm kind of splitting hairs at that point. But I am a fan of some of their later work. I do like Sorrow Galaxies in particular. I like the long form nature of it and just how raw it is, but still producing its own atmosphere. And I like the direction they took in the late 2000s. This record is much more raw. It is much more indicative of their peak popularity of the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, and back when they were really known for what they were doing, and their infamy was at its strongest. And so, not being a huge expert on that style, I really didn't have that much to say about it here. I do think this is a good black metal record. It has a nice raw style. It's very much in keeping with the tradition of the era that they're referencing here, and I think it's a fine example of like a comeback record that inherently still understands where it was coming from back in the day. Oracular Hexations is the sophomore full-length album from Portland, Oregon-based bestial black death metal trio Diabolic Oath. It follows up Profane Death Exodus with a similar style. I think this is maybe a little bit more of a more dynamic production value that really changes the sound of the band a little bit. I think that there are, maybe more riffs that I can make out in the recording, and the artwork is a little bit sharper here. Seems to be an overall improvement over the debut, and that makes good sense for the amount of time that it's been. The sort of unique thing about this band is not necessarily their sound and their approach and style, but the fretless guitar work that they've included along with fretless bass work. All that this does is create a different sense of swinging motion whenever they're approaching something that's fairly brutal. It really adds to the atmosphere of it when they incorporate guitar effects. A solid war metal album in a way, but also one that's got more to it than just black death metal permutations. But they certainly have somewhere to go with it. I think that this style is worth exploring. I think the rhythms are always interesting, more so in the earlier tracks on this album, but they do well to keep it going for a full listen, and I had a pretty good time with it. Some of it is pretty challenging to sort of make out the intention of the movement, and that's kind of part of where they get their unique sound from, is those fretless instruments, which leave a lot of the left hand technique up to chance in some respects. None of it totally goes off rails, so well worth checking out. And Terrain is the latest full-length album from, I believe, Chicago and sort of East Coast based drone rock or post-metal band Locrian. And this is a different record for them. This is a much heavier record. They've been influenced by things like black metal in the past and death metal and all that. And this record doesn't really lean into that aspect so much, as it just creates heavier, faster pieces to balance out their more ambient side. Now, this is, of course, in very strong contrast to one of their most easygoing records, the dark ambient New Catastrophism from back in 2022, and this is much more of a catchy guitar loop driven faster beats, all that. They put a lot of energy into this record compared to their past, and now this starts to feel more like a band and a performance than maybe just like an art project. For me, that was pretty interesting. A couple of really catchy songs on here, a couple of really sorrowful, sort of apocalyptic rock beats and pieces. So well worth checking out, even if it's not really your style. I think there's a unique enough approach to texture, layering, and use of synths that this will be interesting to most people who just want something that's kind of a catchier but also obscure. So it's kind of a surprise that just under a year after Austere returned with their sort of comeback record in 2023, we find out that what that was a transitional record to reintroduce the name and to help make the transition from what a lot of people would consider a pretty essential depressive black metal band, and now what is more of a dark metal group. And when I say dark metal, I mean melodic metal that is certainly dark toned and has some adjacency to black metal and extreme metal in general. So there is a black metal edge to this work, and it does show up in the vocals and some of the arrangements here and there. But overall, this is very much a melody-based thing. It's very clear once you hear the actual vocal style and how it carries a tune. You'll understand that they've made the transition there beyond some of the pieces that were in this style on the previous record. It shouldn't feel too drastic, and I didn't find it all that uncomfortable. I felt this was a pretty well-written album that is still introverted and distant in its performance, that it feels like something different, something I haven't quite heard in this style in a while. Although some of the guitar progressions and some of the work on some of these songs does feel very familiar, such as Cold Cerecloth. I feel like that hook is very much of a certain era and a certain band, but translated in their own language. I was a fan of the last record because it leaned a little bit more into atmospheric black metal at times, and this is a much more direct album with shorter songs, a very easy to approach and accessible record with some interesting emotional resonance to it, it'll be worth checking out for maybe more so for the dark metal and melodic metal fan than the outright black metal fan who might be quick to judge the tuneful nature of this. Transcendent Unveiling of Dimensions is a debut demo from Purulency. This is a Kingsport, Tennessee-based death metal quintet, and we formed some years ago with a sort of an old-school death metal feeling in mind, and that's what we get here on this demo. This was released earlier this year on cassette and CD, and this is me mentioning the vinyl version of it because I didn't review it or didn't get a chance to review it back when it released in January. If you're a fan of Finnish death metal, that is obviously their focus here. Along the way, there is some of a bit of a mix-up with some Swedish death metal rhythms, and so those become more prominent to start, and then it weirds out a little bit towards the end, and we get the full spread of what they're trying to do here, which I compared to maybe the later Carnifex demos and Abhorrence in terms of the death doom metal that spikes up in their sound along the way. Labyrinth of Anguish is the debut EP from Tenebrific. This is a Australian duo to start between a member of Golgothan Remains and the vocalist of Decrepit. And basically, what we get here is a dramatic and kind of epic form of death metal, which is very different from what the bassist was doing in Sarcophagum. So this feels like they're striking out on their own project and seeing how far they can go with it. And I think that this record makes a pretty good case where I could see them pushing this style a bit harder and making it even more dramatic. But overall, the longer form songs and the dramatic performances really are what sells this, and it does make it an interesting release.
Cold